welcome to our 54th annual Duryea Day show here at Boyertown Community Park.
Where were you 54 years ago?
I was but a thought, and I don't think I was even a thought. I don't think I was anything, nothing less than. You?
Oh, I was around, let's see, 54. I guess I was in high school maybe. I feel old.
Don't feel
Junior
old.
high maybe. I don't know.
There's lots of cars here older than
Yeah.
you, so
Yeah.
we're going to see some of those later. And we've got a couple of good ones here to round out the hour. So thank you to our event sponsors, BB&T. Oh my, we have a lot. Gablesville Athletic Association. Thank you to Quigley Chevrolet. Thank you all for supporting the Boyertown Museum and this great event here. So without further ado, let's just go. It's beautiful. We got stuff to see and do and people to talk to. Okay, well, we have moved out here into the edge of the woods, and we're here with Bob and his, I already forgot the year. It's a 57 Dodge.
57 Dodge Custom Royal Lancer.
It's absolutely gorgeous. Is it original?
It's entirely original. It has 19,342 miles on it as we speak.
19,000 when you bought it, so it was stored.
52 miles on it when I went to look at it. There's an oil change sticker in the door jamb for 19,019 miles from 1989. So they put 33 miles on it in 30 years. The story goes, when I went to look at the car, there was the guy that owned it is about 45 years old. His grandfather was best friends with the guy that bought this car new. That fella passed away young, and this guy's grandfather wanted his best friend's car. He bought the car off his parents and never drove it. The grandson that I bought it off of, he remembers playing in the car in the garage, but he said he never remembered his grandfather driving it for his entire life. And 5 years ago, his grandfather passed away, willed it to his grandson. He got it running 5 years ago, but then he never drove it. So he put it in Hemmings, and I was lucky enough to see it 4 hours after it was advertised, and I made an appointment to go look at it, and I couldn't let it pass. I had to buy it.
So it's a local car, or is that?
It's about a little over an hour from here. It was north of Harrisburg at a little town called Williamstown. The fellow that was selling it was less than 5 miles from Williamstown. So the car never left home, so to speak.
Why it only has 19,000 miles on it.
It's amazing what is out there. I am astounded.
I kind of had to go look at it in disbelief. Because, you know, how many times do you see a car that old advertised with 19,000 miles on it? And I thought, I got to go look at it, you know, and see. And when I looked at it, I was pleasantly surprised. Now, it was crummy, don't get me wrong. But other than brakes and fuel system, all I really did was clean. And a lot of cleaning. The inside stank. Had a lot of mold and mildew on it, and I had to gut the entire interior. And when I started putting it back together, I had the sound deadener in, but not the carpets yet. The carpets weren't dry, and my wife stuck her head in the car, and she said, "Whatever you put back in here, it stinks again." So I pulled the sound deadener out, and I put new sound deadener in, and that got rid of most of the smell.
Well, you can't tell that it was not looking so great because it looks great now. It really looks good.
It's amazing what a little spit and polish does. But it's a custom Royal Lancer which was a top of the line Dodge, but it was what I'll call a Berks County car. It was stripped. No radio, no clock, no nothing. It had power steering and brakes, and the driver's side mirror. That was it. So I had to put dual rear antennas on it and a radio, and I put a clock in it and the map light and the Lancer hubcaps. I had to put Lancer hubcaps on it. And like I said, just a lot of cleanup. I didn't try to touch up any more than I had to spruce the car up. I didn't want to paint, things. I wanted to keep it original. So.
And you have some, it looks like copies of some papers you found. I guess one is that oil. Right.
Well, one is the build sheet. When I went to look at the car, the build sheet was under the trunk mat, and I didn't tell the owner that. And the shipping tag from the manufacturing plant was under the driver's side front carpet. So I just folded stuff down and didn't say nothing, and I thought, I cannot believe this car. So when I got it home, I made copies, and on the 5758 Dodge website, I posted a photo of the build sheet, and a guy that runs the Facebook site, he said it's got to be the prettiest build sheet he's ever saw. So it's.
Yeah, I've seen build sheets, and they're really ratty. And if they were, some of them, they'll be in the seats, and you'll see all the spring marks and stuff. Yep.
This was under the trunk mat, and the trunk mat's like new yet. It doesn't even look like they put too many bags of groceries in the back. It's amazing. So.
Now you said you replaced a couple things like the brakes or whatever, but
Yeah.
Is it a pretty good driver?
Oh yeah. Well, what's neat about this car, when you drive it, you can tell it only has 19,000 miles on it. The steering is tight. Everything is tight. It doesn't make a rattle or nothing. When you go over railroad tracks, it doesn't rattle, squeak. It's like a time machine. It's a nice driver, real nice driver, and I enjoy driving it. So I'm going to rack up the miles. I put probably more miles on it in 2 months than have been put on in the last 50 years.
Well, thanks for racking up some miles to drive it here today and driving home. So.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Now, for those of you, you might recognize this guy. Bob was on our show last year. Had a 57 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser with the cool console-mounted air conditioner thing. So that maybe if it rings a bell, his face rings a bell, that's where he comes from. And so
I like low mileage originals.
Now he's got homework for next year to find us something else.
I'll have to bring something else next year. See what I can dig up.
There's always more to dig up. It's
amazing what's out there. You never know what's out there until my friend Benny, he found the DeSoto, and I thought, I'm going to have to keep an eye open for a low mileage Mopar forward look car, and it wasn't that long. I didn't have to wait that long. I just happened to be lucky, and I went on a slow day at work. I went on their website, and there it was. And when the guy's wife and I went to the bank, when I gave him the cashier's check, she said to her husband, she said, we got to change our phone message on our answering machine to start out and say the 57 Dodge is sold. Because apparently after the car was in the magazine, the phone was ringing off the hook. So you got to be ready when they come up. Yep. Okay.
what we forget anything?
No, I think.
And he mentioned there's a DeSoto. We're gonna go, I think, look at the DeSoto now, aren't we? All right. So give us a minute to re-aim our camera, and we'll be looking at a DeSoto soon. All right, well, thanks. We had to move our camera a few feet here, and we are now looking at a 58 DeSoto, and I think it's also an unrestored, right,
Yes.
Benny?
Yes, it is. Has
Um,
33,000 original miles.
so now, have you had this one a long time?
No, I bought it about a year ago.
Okay.
It was sitting in a garage for about 15, 20 years. The fellow died, and his son was going to restore it or get it going, and he never did. And he decided to sell it. And a friend of mine got first chance at it, but he was having sickness problems at the time, and he decided to let me buy the car. So I got the second chance to get in the car then.
Dueling Mopars. Because we just talked to Bob with his Dodge, and now we have yours, and he was telling us about how you found this vehicle, and then he said, "Oh, I have to get busy now." So
Well, he did have a Plymouth, but then he sold it, a 57 Plymouth. And he said, "Oh, I have an empty garage bay for a while now." And then I came up with this, and then it wasn't long he found that.
So all the paint on here and everything is original,
Yes,
and
it is. The paint, the chrome, the interior, everything is original. Other than I did repaint part of the engine to dress it up a little nicer. We had to take the engine apart. It ended up with stuck valves and bent push rods, and had quite a bit of trouble getting it going from sitting.
it's amazing the colors. You know, there's bright colors, and I've read articles and like today's cars. You know, they're all boring and they don't have colors. I'll tell you what. I'm going to be honest. If I went and bought a car and it was, or if I'm looking at a car and it was this color, today's car, I'm probably nah. I think Jeep is the only ones who get away.
Loud ones, yes.
yeah, but it looks different on a car like this than it would like on a.
Right.
Today's cars don't have any chrome. I mean, you need the chrome for that color.
And again, just like Bob, you might recognize Benny too, because we had him on the show with a 57 Ranchero, 58 Ranchero, Ford Ranchero last year. So it's neat that these guys keep finding vehicles, and so also willing to be on this show.
Well, it's nice that you come and bring a different car too. That's cool. Like,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
fun to have different cars so you don't get bored with the same old one.
no, it's neat to see. As always, like the variety here is something. And so thanks to you and Bob for providing some of that variety too.
So does I mean the car is about the size of a house. So how does it ride? I'm kind of curious.
Beautiful, smooth, quiet. Yes.
Pretty heavy. Is it a heavy
It feels heavy when you're driving. Yes, it feels like a heavy riding car.
Steering is about the same.
Beautiful on these. Mopars have real easy steering. They're easier than Ford or GM. Very easy. I had a 61 Chrysler years ago, same way. Very easy steering, and they handle well with the torsion bar suspension.
Sure, it's comfortable. It's like sitting on a couch in there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's part of couches in a house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's two of them in
I have
there.
a magazine out of one of these cars, and they have, I think it's like 12 or 13 sailors all in the same car saying gobs and gobs of room. They're all squished in there.
I love that. That's great.
So that I had to buy it.
Well, yeah. Now, does this? We had a DeSoto some time ago on the show, and it had a push button. This is not.
No, this is push button.
It is push button.
So it would be the automatic transmission. Now, do these cars come with standard transmissions by any chance?
I don't know if you could get that or not. I'm thinking not, but I don't know for sure.
So chances are every one of them had push button on it.
Because DeSoto was a higher end car, and I doubt you could get a standard shift in those. Where Plymouth, I think you could, and maybe even Dodge. But Chrysler and DeSoto, I doubt it. On these years, anyway. Yeah.
And does the push button work well?
Yes, it works fine. This is Bob's has a torque flight, which is a 3-speed. This is just a power flight, which is a 2-speed in this one. So it only shifts one time. His shifts twice.
So, what after you got it? I mean, how much cleanup did you have to do? You know, Bob sort of went in detail about cleaning his and stuff. And did you have to do a lot of cleaning?
I do a lot too. The chrome was so tarnished looking. The front bumper looked green, with just like a mold, and it was in a nice garage. I don't know why it got that way, but all the trim was really, I had to really go over it all. And of course, I compounded and polished the paint because it was dull and faded down from all them years of sitting. And this old paint, if you take it out in the shows too often, you got to keep polishing it. It fades back out because of the old style enamel paint with no clear coat. But yeah, the chrome was really horrible on this car when I got it.
So again, just like Bob, it just took a lot of elbow grease and work. And I mean, I'm looking at both of these cars right now, side by side, and you know, they look almost new or restored. And it's just amazing that, you know, you have two cars from over 60 years ago, and you know, their paint looks better than my car, only a handful of years old. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at these two; they're both really stylish, first of all, and then I can't believe they're original. That's just mind-boggling to me, because at least whoever had them before you guys, at least they were obviously were kept in a garage, even though you had mold and dust.
The fellow that bought this new, the son told me he never took it out in the rain. It was never in snow, never in rain. He had another car he used, an older one he kept, and this car was his baby, and he never took it out in bad weather. And I guess that's why it only has so many low miles on it. He took it to some trips up in the cold regions where they had some family, but it had to be nice weather for him to take this car out. That's what I was told.
So this one was also in Pennsylvania, pretty much? Okay.
Yeah, pretty close to where I live, actually, only a few miles from where I live. And it was in a ranch house, a nice rancher development garage, when I found it. My friend told me about it, because he had first chance to buy it. He has a body shop, and this has some damage on the hood I got to get repaired yet. It has a couple spots from a carburetor fire, which was done before I got it. And he took it there for an estimate, but he never got it fixed. And my friend got this information from him to buy the car if he ever wanted to sell it. And then my friend got sickly when his son decided he was going to sell it, and he didn't want the car, so he said, if you want the car, you can have it, go get it. So I went and bought it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got the car. My friend would have bought it.
Good thing you went along.
Yeah. So I never thought I'd have one of these. I was kind of elated to get something like that. I've never had a DeSoto before. I've had all kinds of Ford and GM stuff, but I never had a lot of Chrysler cars. So this is sort of interesting. I had a 61 300G convertible years ago that now is worth a lot of money if I would have kept it. It was a factory stick one, which was only like 15 of them built. There was only 365 convertibles even. And I inherited the car when my friend drowned, but I didn't save the car. I traded it in on a newer car, and back then it wasn't worth anything. Now it's probably $150,000, $190,000 car. But so.
Okay, Ben. Now, question: what's the next car we're looking for?
My dream car is a *56 Packard Caribbean convertible, but they're very expensive.
Yeah.
But I would love to have one of those.
They're bigger than a house. They're as big as an office building.
Everything's power. Yeah, a lot of goodies on them. A lot of automatic leveling, everything. Yeah. That or a '57 Eldorado Barretts convertible, but I think I'd go for the Packard first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If he gets that Packard, we're talking to him, because I want one of those.
Right.
Three-tone paint. Yeah. And they only built it, probably in '56, I think they only built like 365 of them. So I don't know how many of them are left, but you see one here and there at a show. In '55, they have made a few more, a couple hundred more, I think. But that 6, I think, is a little nicer. But I would take a 5 if the deal came along. Yeah. But.
Cool. All right. This is a beautiful car, and we thank you for bringing it, and hopefully see you next year with something, too.
We'll be here with something.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, we were just at a DeSoto that was a very distinctive color.
Yes, and I mentioned it being very distinctive, and I would not buy a car today with that unless it's maybe a Jeep. And so, what do we? So,
And yet here we are at another car of a similar color. So
but because of the color of this, it has a great story.
it does. So we're here with the owner, Bob Daniels. So Bob, what are we looking at? I guess first of all,
You're looking at my 1964 Mercury Comet. It's an anniversary color. It's called, well, Ford called it Samoan Coral. Mercury called it Bittersweet. Samoan Coral sounds so much more classy. But the car was only available in full-size Mercurys and Fords, and also the Thunderbird line. Somehow, a dealership in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, got special ordered 2 of them. The first one I bought used from a guy named Dvorsky in Pittsburgh. I bought it when I was 19, and I had it until I turned 21. I knew so much more back then, and I sold it. So that went up to New York and was wrecked. The girl that I sold it to, she wrecked it up in New York. Well, I wanted another one. I missed my car. That was one woman said to me, she says, "What'd you do with your old car?" And I says, "I sold it." She says, "Oh, you sold your identity." You know, that's how it was. But in any event,
So you're searching for another car, same color?
I've been looking for another 64 Comet, this color.
This
I could
color.
have bought a 64 Comet anywhere.
But you didn't know. Did you know at that time how rare they were?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Had no idea. So then what happened, about probably 5 years into the search, I'm going down a road in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and there it is, sitting in a real estate parking lot. I go in, ask the guy who owns the car. He says, "Oh, that's Mary Burns." Well, Mary Burns parks it there and takes the bus to work. And I says, "Do you have her phone number?" And back then, "Sure, I'll give it to you." So he gives me her phone number, and of course I called her. "Oh, I'm sorry." She says, "I'm saving it for my nephew." Well, the nephew ended up getting the car, never titled it. All right? He sold it right away to a guy in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, and then another guy in West Newton, Pennsylvania bought it. And I searched these people. One person I called, lady gets on the phone, and I said, "Do you people ever own a 1964? "Oh, Charlie, there's a guy on the phone that had the Comet." Oh, she was so excited. But in any event, so then it goes into Ohio, and 3 people in Ohio owned it. My son saw on the internet with a Cyclone hood on it, but sitting in a car show with a for sale sign. He puts an ad on Craigslist trying to find the owner because we wanted to buy this car. Well, long story short, nobody answered it. So now, 4 years ago, I guess it's been, he finds another ad for a Bittersweet Comet that was taken down. So he calls the guy, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "my wife is dying." And he says that I took it offline. He says, "But it's here." He says, "If you guys want to see it, if you're not interested," because he told him the story behind it. So my son calls me, and he says, "Dad," he says, "I have a Comet we have to go look at over in Ohio." And I said, "What's so special about it?" He says, "Does the name Mary Burns ring a bell?" That was the original owner. And I have all the paperwork for this. I have a copy of her title, her owner's card. Mary and Agnes Burns bought this car together at that Uniontown. It was a brand new Mercury dealership, and that's how we feel that only 2 were ever built. Because the first one I bought was about 45 minutes from this dealership. And of course, Mary Burns lived in Uniontown, and I have all the paperwork saying, even the owner's manual. And it only has 57,000 miles on it. Now, I don't know how far you want to go with this, but I'm in a car show I moved out of Pittsburgh, moved over here. The car was originally from Pittsburgh, but now, I had it back over into eastern Pennsylvania. So we're at a car show in Chamonix. Guy comes up to me and he said, where did you get the car? And I says, my God, I says, bought it from a guy in Ohio. And he says, boy, he says, it looks exactly like my dad's car. And he says, I said, he says, well, I says, really? I says, supposedly there were only 2 built this color. He says, oh no, he said, I know it's my dad's car. He says, he painted it. He was the one that, repainted it back then in his garage. And I says, what is your name? He says, Mark. And then he tells me his father's last name, and I have the receipts for the paint, the bumpers, everything that was done to the car. And I says, this was your dad's car. He says, you don't want to sell it, do you? So, of course, I wouldn't sell it to him.
I think you went through enough to get it.
Yeah,
But wow.
yeah, so it's original, and it's one of one, and I'm living happily ever after, and my son will get it when I'm done.
Wow. You couldn't make that up.
No, I know.
No, it's really
It's
neat.
a unique story.
And I kind of wonder as I hear this story now for the second time, I guess,
Yeah.
is, why this dealer in Uniontown wanted cars this color,
Well,
It's just,
this dealer went out. He's no longer in business. Now,
No
whether the
wonder.
color
He's getting
caused that,
special.
I don't know.
no.
But it's no longer in business. However, I can only assume either this Magorsky, I think his name was, not Magorsky. I forget what his name is, but in any event, Dvorsky, or Agnes and Mary Burns wanted one this color. And I think what happened was, because the guy was a new dealership, Ford probably looked the other way, because where these were manufactured over in Ohio wasn't that far away from Uniontown, Pennsylvania. This is only an assumption, because the Marty reports, ironically, you can't track it because Ford had a fire and all the records for like 64 down or something like that.
Oh, okay.
So all this is because of the paperwork I have. That's how I
Okay.
can tell my story.
And so maybe this dealer in Uniontown had a connection to the Ford plant.
Right. Or, like
yeah.
I said, if he was a new dealership, well, you know what? We'll do this for you. Since
Yeah.
you're new at this, I can only assume that.
Maybe a little PR for his new dealership. Or...
Yeah. But this car here, if you look at the pictures, is exactly like my first one. All the backup lights are an option, the power steering, every option that was on my first car is on this car. Even the seatbelts. That was
Okay.
an option back then. So he must have had to buy 2 of them.
2 identical
rather
ones.
than just ordering the one.
Wow, that's neat.
But it
Yeah.
is. It's a clone to my first one. What else can I
What
tell you?
what are the odds, really, that you were able to, not realizing how
Yeah.
rare it was?
I had no idea. And ever I've talked to Mercury dealers at the different shows and the guys that worked on them, boy, that's a great color. Where did you get that car? I've never seen one like it. Oh, and one other thing. On the color, on the build plate, it's blank, which shows that it was a special order color. There is no, originally it should be code L, but because it was a special order in the comment line, there's no code on the colors part. So that's another unique part about the
Okay.
car.
Now, you gave us 2 paint names, but it's the same. They're the same color. It's just
Motor
Ford.
Company is Mercury also.
Ford called it one thing. And
Ford called it Samoan Coral. And that's what I called my first one because I had no idea. And Samoan, my first one, guy backed into me at a gas station and I had to have it repaired. So I have a half a pint of paint left over and that paint is all over this car, touching it up. It's the original 50-year-old can of paint that I have. Still have that at home. And it says Samoan Coral and Bittersweet on it. Ditzler.
that is cool.
So that's it. Are
Boy,
there
what
any
else
questions?
Yeah, what else can you ask? It's like, wow.
That's that.
Well,
So, excuse me. So you said when you bought it, it had, you said about 33,000? No,
had
that was.
yeah, this had 54,000
I'm
on
on
it.
the wrong car.
Yes.
Yeah.
The wrong pink car.
I-
Wrong pink car.
I bought this. This had 54,000 miles. And I can believe it. I have 57 on it now. But I can believe the 54,000 because all the documentation, for some reason, almost everyone, obviously, that had the car kept the receipts. So, and you could see where it was inspected at so many miles, and you can kind of put two and two together and kind of verify that it is 54,000 miles. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, hey, this is great that you came to the show.
Well, I thank you very much for telling me about it.
I was hoping you would be here, and I was searching for you. I said, okay, it's a pink comet. Did you see a pink comet? And yeah.
No, it's not pink. It's coral.
Well,
don't call
Bittersweet.
For the general public, it was easy to see.
Exactly.
So, and then, yeah, great car.
But and thank you so much for inviting me, Dan.
Oh yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I've never seen this place.
Yeah.
This is amazing what you have here.
Yeah.
It really is. And we have to do the museum tour later on. My two friends are over there. We're doing the museum tour.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a lot to do in one day.
It sure is.
Yeah. But, if you can't do it, you'll have to come back.
Well, we'll work something out.
We will. Okay.
Thank you so much. This is a treat.
Oh, it's my
Great
pleasure.
story.
Really, thank
Like
you
I
so
said,
much.
you can't make it up. So those are the best kind.
No, there was. You can't make this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You know, we were just talking off camera how it's not Duryea Day until we talk to you, Ron, and and see what you brought for us. I think this is our third year now we've had you on because you always bring cool stuff that, yes, he's counting.
I'm thinking 4.
Maybe.
Fire truck,
Uh-huh.
Chevys
Uh-huh.
over there,
Yeah,
2 Chevys
yep.
here, and then
Yep. All right, so see?
anyway.
Now that you're here, Duryea, we're good. Everyone can go home. It's the end of Before we let you go, though, you brought 2 cars with us here again this year, and you're going to dispel some myths, I think, as we go along here. But the first one is really cool. It's a curved dash, so...
It's a 1901 curved dash Oldsmobile. It was kind of neat. This was the first year for Oldsmobile. And the way I understand it, there was a building that there were prototypes built before anything went into production of possible models. And the building had a fire, and the curved dash was the only model they got out, so that's the one they built.
How about that?
Oh.
So, and this is 1901, which was the first year.
It's almost dumb luck that they made it, huh?
And the curved dash was quite popular, I guess, in 1901. Right?
Yeah. Well, there wasn't a whole lot to choose from in 1901.
Right,
The
right.
industry was just starting up.
I mean, and now, I was thinking about this earlier, and I'm not going to sing it for you, but isn't this the car they made the song "In My Merry Oldsmobile"?
Yes.
They made it about the curved dash.
That was about the curved dash.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
You-
you're not going to sing it either, are you?
I don't know the words.
You? Okay.
That's my excuse.
We're safe, okay.
If it isn't the title, I don't know the words.
So, okay. And there's something about this car. First time I saw this car, Ron pointed this out to me, and it's the wheels on it. And the spokes aren't all coming in together, but they're staggered on the hub.
Yes.
Every other one, and it's just a weird design. And you said they discontinued that or changed
Yes,
it soon after
it's
that?
actually it's very rare to find one with these wheels because the design wasn't any good, and if you went around the corner too fast, the spokes would pop out and the wheel would collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So they discontinued that really soon after they started making them.
Well, and what's interesting is we have in our museum a lot of horse-drawn carriages with that same design, the staggered spokes on the hub. And so that was probably the thinking back then, but this was a vehicle that weighed more and was faster.
Yes.
And, you know, I don't know.
And a lot of your automobile bodies evolved from carriage builders. So that there's on the older cars, you run into a lot of things that have characteristics of horse-drawn wagons and such, and that's must be one of them. But I do know on cars, this is the only Oldsmobile I've ever seen with them on. But I did read a bit about them that there was a lot of problems with them, so they discontinued them. Most of the curved dash olds actually have wire wheels on them.
Wire wheels, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also see replicas. I don't think they're full size like this, but
There's
it looks like they have bicycle wheels on.
Yeah, there's 3/4 scale ones and there was half scale ones. Most of those, I believe, were made in the 50s. And they have like lawnmower engines in them to run them. And yeah, in fact, a friend of mine has a 3/4 scale. We actually have a half scale that someday we're going to restore, but that's in the list of.
Am I surprised? No.
Hey, it's on the list behind the milk truck. So
Okay. Well, you're not going to restore that, are you?
the milk truck,
No.
no,
You're just going to
just gonna
put
try.
clear coat on it.
Yeah,
Leave it. Preserve it.
yeah,
Preserve it.
yeah. We're gonna
Okay.
do that.
So with this, what kind of speeds are we talking about with a 1901 vehicle?
I'm not sure. I think like the top speed was maybe 15, something like
15.
that. Yeah.
And that's. I'm thinking, okay, if you're in a bicycle going 15 miles an hour, you are moving pretty quick.
Yes.
Okay. And a car, you feel a little safer, but the roads back then.
The roads back then were
nothing
really
like-
bad.
yeah,
That's
they were
right.
bad. So you probably didn't even want to go 15.
No. It. Well, the suspension and all on it would have been bad. It would have been really bad holding the road. I think any kind of a ride in it would be a real challenge.
Yeah. So, and I see it has, what kind of spring? Are they transverse springs? Is that what they're called?
Now, transverse is side to side.
Cross, okay.
Yeah.
But it's going from axle to axle as the springs with
Yes.
the body mounted
Yes.
in the body. or in the
And
middle.
in fact, one thing you have to be careful with on these, the way these are put together is really kind of weird. And I don't know if you noticed, when we took it off the trailer, we actually had a strap going from the front axle to the back,
Yes, I noticed that.
and I took that off over there.
Right.
You have to do that on these because when you put them in a trailer and you tie them down and you pull on the front axle, you pull forward, the back axle you pull backwards, you'll actually pull the car apart on these.
Wow. Okay.
So whenever you trailer these, you have to put one to connect the two together. So then when you're tying it down, that's what actually keeps it from pulling the car apart.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where?
Did you learn that by experience, or did someone tip you off on that?
I read about it in a magazine. And actually one time, even with that, I didn't have it super tight. And we pulled it on the trailer, and when we got home, I saw where it was starting to come apart, and so I put it back together. And now when I put that center or that front to rear strap on, I make that one pretty tight now.
So where does one find a 1901 curved dash Oldsmobile? In other words,
In my
where'd
garage.
you find this? Or here at Dory AJ.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They're very rare.
Well, yeah.
And actually, I think a lot of them are in museums, and you don't really see them around.
No.
I think actually there's a club. I think that there's a fair amount of them in Europe.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but around here you don't see many. You'll see.
They were probably
So-
all hot rodded and crashed.
Yeah.
Kidding, folks.
Even out at Hershey at their show,
You might
you may
see
see
one.
one or two,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah.
And even then, some years you might not see any. Yeah, they're getting pretty scarce.
Well, I imagine this is pretty much a wood body, like a carriage. I mean, I guess there maybe a lot of them probably rotted out, as you know, the T's and stuff at least have are metal.
Yeah, although there's a lot of wood in a Model T also, but and just the fact too, I think a lot of them since they're not really super roadworthy anymore. When you consider, even for a Model T today, it's the way people drive and all. It's not really good driving them out on the road any distance. And I remember back in the 80s when we started coming here, I used to drive the Model T down.
Okay.
And I wouldn't even think of doing that anymore because people pull out in front of you. They think you can stop, and you really can't stop well with them. So, on this old stuff, it's best just to trailer it.
Okay. So now you said this was, you were telling us, this is the first mass-produced car. Was
the
it?
Curved Dash Soldier was the first mass-produced car.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people think it was a Model T Ford, and it wasn't. See, originally, most cars were put together by a couple of people, and they would start. They'd have a station in the factory where they would start building the car. A couple of people would work on it, and they would start with the frame and build until they had the car done. When that car was done, they would hopefully drive it out or push it out, and then they would start on the next car. And Oldsmobile was trying to be more efficient, so they came up with the idea of mass production, which was they hired people to do certain tasks. For instance, if you would be working in the Olds plant, your job might be to put wheels on, and you would start in the factory, and they would have all the cars lined up at their workstations, and you would start at one end and just put wheels on one car, then move to the next one, put wheels on, and you went down the line doing that.
So you were specialized in doing something.
Yes.
But it was not a moving assembly line.
No, it was you moved, the employee moved to the car and did their job, and then they moved to the next car. And Ford took that idea and perfected it with the Model T. And that was in 1914. He came up with the moving assembly line, which actually, I don't know if you knew this or not, he got the idea of the moving assembly line from going to a slaughterhouse and was watching how they were moving the animals' bodies around to butcher them. And he got the idea, if you can disassemble an animal this way, you should be able to go the opposite direction and build a car.
It's interesting.
And actually, when he started the moving assembly line, to practice before he actually started building a line, they started by tying ropes to a frame,
Okay.
and they had men that pulled the ropes and pulled the car through the line, and then each person did their job, and at the end ended up with a car. That was the first, the trial of the assembly line, and then when he saw that worked, then he moved to the, then he built the assembly line. And that went into 1914, which we have a 1914 here. That was the first year for Ford for the moving assembly line.
So that's sort of like a segue to going to our next car, right?
I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, but wait, I have a question.
I'm sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry.
But wait. So what kind of, I'm sure it's a huge, powerful engine in this thing. So what kind of engine did they put in these?
It's a single cylinder. I think, if I remember right, it produces around 7 horsepower. So it's a very small engine. And then from the transmission, the final drive to the rear axle, that is done with a chain. And that's one of the things that makes the car very unsafe, because to stop the car, the brake is in the transmission. So if you're going down the road and you go to step on the brake and your chain breaks, the transmission will stop turning, but the car will keep going and you'll lose control of it. That was a big downfall of this car.
So that was before they started coming up with the emergency brake or
Yes.
service brake or whatever they
Yes.
called it back
Yes.
then.
Well, in 1901, there was no emergency brake.
Okay.
And actually, that was one thing they did. I think it was 1903, they put an emergency brake on it.
And now, am I correct? Oldsmobile, I mean the curved dash Olds used interchangeable parts. Correct? Was that?
Yes.
So that was another reason why I would assume that it was quicker, because everything was supposed to fit any other piece.
That made it. That also brought in made it easier for mass production.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So now we can segue, I guess.
One
to-
last thing. I like your horn.
Yes, the early ones had bells.
Yes.
I think it was 1903 or 1904 when they put a bulb horn on it. And it was mounted in the same spot.
Okay.
Looks like a really large bicycle bell.
Yes.
Actually, that one, we don't have the right bell on it. That is a bicycle bell.
Never mind, you didn't hear that.
It's the closest thing we could find.
Okay, so now we moved over to the 1914 T, which I believe you said is the first year they used the moving assembly line. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the first year. And that was also the first year for the all-black Model T. Before, from 1908 to 1913, they were available in colors.
And gee, why was that all black?
The reason in 1914 to change to black was because of the moving assembly line. And with the assembly line, they could only be painted in one color. And the reason they could only be painted in one color was when the car got to the paint station of the assembly line, then the idea of paint back then wasn't for beauty, it was for protection. So they wanted the paint to flow into every crevice. So it was actually, instead of sprayed, it was actually sprayed with like a garden hose. And the paint was supposed to flow. So when it was like painted, sprayed onto this panel, they wanted the paint to run down over the panel, and in order to get everywhere. Then what happened when it reached the bottom of the car, it dripped into a huge pan. And the paint was then recirculated up for the next car. So when you're painting cars that way, you cannot do multiple colors or you'll have an awful mess.
You'll have a tie-dyed car.
Yes. So for that reason, they had to do one color, and they picked black because it was called Japan Black because Ford did different tests, and they found that Japan Black dried the fastest. So for the assembly line, that worked good. So that was the reason for the all-black Model T. And all the Model Ts were black from 1914 to 1925. In 1926, then, they started doing colors.
So I had heard the black dried the fastest before. I'd heard that. But it empties into a pan underneath and gets reused. That's neat. I like that.
It's interesting because Henry Ford, being always looking to cut costs, had two reasons for going to one color, and it's just,
Yeah.
he was always searching, and I'm sure he had a team of people also searching, how can we make this car more inexpensive so the masses could buy it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and to continue with the paint story, at the end of the assembly line, there was a man whose job was touch-up to make sure that any area that got missed. Touch-up was done with a 4-inch paintbrush. So he'd see an area that they missed, and he would take and just, and that was it. So really, as far as restoring a car today, the most amateur, worst imaginable paint job of today is very much nicer paint job than what these were originally.
When I think touch-up, I do not think 4-inch brush.
No, that's it. But everything with the Model T, it was primarily to be a cheap car. He wanted it to be a high quality car, but a cheap car. And something to it with like a 1914, sometimes they look kind of funny because he got headlights and parking lights from different vendors. And all he cared about was that the car came through with 2 headlights and 2 parking lights installed. And if, like this car has all John Brown lights, and on the assembly line, if the lights got mixed up and you ended up with a John Brown light on the one side and a Victor light on the other, that was fine, as long as it had 2 headlights. So,
So when we restore cars and we look at stuff like that to make it accurate, but he wouldn't have. Yeah. We're doing a nicer job than he would have, probably.
yeah. In fact, like this, with this car having the headlights, the parking lights, and the tail light are all John Brown, that didn't happen often because there would always be something mixed up on it. And the other thing is, too, like the headlights, there's actually a left and a right. And it didn't matter. A lot of times the car would come through with 2 rights, 2 lefts, and it didn't matter. As long as it had 2 headlights was all that mattered. Because he wanted to get the cars built and, get them out.
Out the door and sold.
Yes, and do it as cheaply as possible, but still have a high-quality automobile. And as far as he was concerned, if it had the wrong, a mismatch of headlights on it, it didn't matter. All he cared about is that the headlights both worked. Yeah, as long as it had 2 working headlights, that was fine.
So, great car. This is one of your Model Ts. I know you got...
We have 4 Model Ts.
4 Model Ts.
Yeah, this is a 1914. We also have a 1915. It's also a touring car. And we have a 1922 touring car and a 1919 coupe.
And being you have multiple years, and they're all fairly close to each other, I've read that it's a chore to try to figure out, which parts, because they made running changes through the years, and
yes,
they put this here and that there.
And one thing that was tough, we also have the 1915, and 15 there was a lot of changes between 1914 and 1915. So what he did, he was a little concerned of problems. So for a while, he was building 1914s and 1915s on the same line, and they were all mixed together. So it's really hard to distinguish a year difference because they were built together. One thing he wanted, 1915 had magneto-powered headlights, so it had a bigger magneto in the transmission. And one thing he was concerned about is if the magneto didn't hold up, he didn't want all these problems coming. So if he used some with 14 headlights, which were the gas headlights, he would have. If he found out he had a problem, he would have less of them out on the street.
All right. Well, geez, like I said, it's not jury day till we talk to you, and we did, and you brought us 2 great cars. I love it. 2 really old ones, and we're trying to get more of the older models here, older years. So thank you for helping us fill out that roster a little bit.
No problem. We just have to figure out what neat we'll bring you next year.
The homework begins tonight. When you get home, you can start thinking about what we do next year. But I thank all of you at home for joining us today and watching, and hope you got to enjoy the cars we did look at today, and you missed a couple hundred more. We're pretty full here today. So if you got to the park, thank you for coming, and if you didn't, put on the calendar for next year, the Saturday of Labor Day weekend. And thank you all, and thanks to all our owners for joining us, and we will see you here at Duryea Day next year.